went to Bolivia. We primarily spent time in its capital, Santa Cruz, or in its biggest city, Santa Cruz. And then we spent some time on the Beni River, which is a little subsidiary of the Amazon, doing some kind of tribal and village medicine. But just an extremely corrupt government. The government runs exclusively on bribes. So if you want to get anywhere or have anything done quickly, you need to bribe. I think it took us, 6 to 8 months just to get our visas, in part because we were not bribing people. There was an easy answer. You get it in a day if you give me $50.
We literally had a friend who knew one of her friends worked at the embassy, and she like dug through a box of other people's visas that were just sitting at someone's desk, unlooked at, and so it was quite the process.
So bribery was how things ran. That's, bad, but, a little funny. There was some more hardy, weighty, bad examples. When we were talking, because kind of a medical and crouch talk, we were working with some of the nurses and doctors who were there. They were talking about how the state of medicine was deteriorating so much because if you were a woman who wanted to be a doctor and were willing to sleep your way up with professors, you could get an MD. So, the institution of just medicine and that facet was falling apart because if you would pay or if you would have sex or if you would do whatever with whoever, you could kind of get, what you want out of that. So that was a difficult area to engage in.
So we started out our trip on the boat that y'all saw in the last picture. And just to go back, yes, that is Piranha, in case you were wondering. We'll get to that. So this boat was a donated Samaritan's Purse boat. We worked with a missionary team who has been on the river for 15, 20 years doing this type of work, but they had just got a new boat. So this was the new boat, and we spent about a week on the river visiting rural villages in the area of the Amazon. So the villages were all pretty different, honestly. Some of them were small, like 3 to 4 families, and some of them were pretty large, like 300 to 400 people at times. Some of them were abandoned. We actually landed at a spot that had previously had people that people had fled because there just weren't enough resources, and they kind of went to surrounding villages to get what they needed. In terms of like setup, we brought a lot of stuff on the boat because a lot of these villages had not been visited since before COVID. So it had been 2 to 3 years since they had received anything from outside people. Most of the villages did not have running water. They did not have electricity. The wealthier villages had generators that, they would have a little bit of electricity here and there. Most of the buildings, as y'all can see, kind of in like this, like were just kind of shacks, and just if it had 4 walls and a roof, like that was what they used. And so just a lot of ways that we could just provide some, even if short-term, like alleviation. So we had everything on the boat that we needed for the medicine aspect. So we had like a pharmacy. We just had, there had been funding for the medicines that we brought. And so we had that, and then we would kind of set up table and chairs. And sometimes it would be in a little building like that, or sometimes it would be on the grass under a tree. And we would triage. Sandon helped a lot with kind of getting patients entered and doing the vital signs, and then we had translators available if people needed that, and then we would kind of see everybody who showed up. And so sometimes that was like 20, 30 people, and then sometimes like we saw 80 people in 4 hours. And for reference, like in clinic, I see 16 people in 4 hours, and that's if everybody shows up, and that's pretty busy. So it was a lot of people, but we were happy to just see whoever we could because they hadn't seen anybody else in a long time. And the things that we mainly saw were related to the river. So because they didn't have access, because they're so remote, they didn't have a lot of access to other resources. And the water they used was the river water. And the Beni is very contaminated, very polluted. And like nearly every child I saw had a parasite infection. Very malnourished, and they had pain and just like lost a ton of weight. And so gave them, parasitic medicine, but also like seems like a Band-Aid on a bullet wound sort of thing. And so some villages had water purification systems, which we encouraged, and like we would kind of share with the villages we saw. But that was a really big problem because it not only affected the children and their nutrition, but it also affected like kids and parents, like, they bathe in the river, and so they had lots of rashes that, like, I had never seen even before, and things that were affecting them day to day that were a result of just the place they were at. In terms of other things we saw, a lot of the kids had lice too, so just a lot of hygiene things that they couldn't help. Like, that's all they have, and so educating them on that and ways to prevent that, and then giving them medicine, and then giving them extra as well, because we don't know when the next, like, government ship was going to be there after we went through. And then a lot of the adults, it was interesting. They had a lot of sexually transmitted diseases because people would sleep around with everybody in the village and then other villages. And people also, there were just tons of kids because one of my patients literally said, there's nothing else to do, so, why not? So there was just a lot of kids and a lot of sexually transmitted disease, and then also no birth control or access to things like that. And so just, like, educating the women, and then also just having some, like, sexual ethic talks, and it just that was hard to navigate, but also just educating them on, like, hey, this is why you keep getting these symptoms, because these things are happening. The only other thing that we kind of did as well was, we do the clinic, and then we usually have a church service of some sort, and the worship pastors and leaders would kind of talk with them while we were providing medical care. And then we would have a church service, and then we would also trade with them to kind of empower them. So we would give them gasoline and clothing, and then we would receive from them food, because everything that we ate was either caught on the river that day or we got from the village that day. And so that led to some interesting consequences. We'll get to that in a sec. So this is just me, so a lot of prenatal care as well. So a lot of pregnant moms who hadn't seen a doctor and didn't know how far along they were or what gender. And so we were able to tell this mom that she was having a girl, and she was not excited because it was her 5th girl. And she was like, I'm not going to tell my husband. And I said, okay. And that's Sandon triaging a few patients, and a lot of elderly patients as well, who just, hadn't seen anyone in a long time. And so trying to navigate their concerns. And then this was just kind of the pharmacy. It was like 2 big buckets of medicines that were sorted in a very organized way, but it didn't look like it every time we unloaded everything. So that was kind of the day-to-day in each village. And so we saw a village about once a day. Yeah, like we would travel. So more pictures of the villages. Yeah, lots of kids and lots of just different education around clean, healthy eating and drinking water.
So the Benny was great. We got, not all healthcare workers were represented there, but all were needed. We just had, me as a nurse, our friend as a social worker, and 3 doctors. So we're able to provide care in those ways. Definitely would have loved to seen therapist. That was not around. Lots of issues with dentistry. That was not around. What else am I missing? The way they lived was based on livestock, so even veterinary medicine. So I'm trying to expand this pretty broadly to say we're talking as a nurse and a doctor, which in some ways is pointed and a little easier to get into places, but I think all facets of healthcare could be utilized in such a way that's really helpful and beneficial to those people.
Yeah,
so
multidisciplinary care is definitely the most helpful. So whatever y'all are considering, it's the Lord can use it. So real quick before Sandon talks about the other village we went to. So the funny pictures that Callie made me share. No, I'm kidding. But so just a result. So this was the river. It was beautiful. The Amazon is gorgeous. Because of things like piranha and the trading we did, we didn't realize one day that the cheese was unpasteurized, and so most of us got sick. Sandon was living his best life over there, and this is me. So y'all can put the pieces together. This was on a boat. Someone was getting baptized. It was beautiful, and I was just trying not to vomit. So, but we all made it through, and we were grateful for the food we had, but it was not so great for the stomach sometimes.
So that was some of the ways that we got to kind of use medicine to help in a hyper-rural setting, just kind of going down the river tribe by tribe and working with them. But in addition to that, we also got to go back to Santa Cruz. We got to go work with the people there. It was sad and difficult. Kind of talked about the corruption of Bolivia trying to think. In regards to religion and religiosity, pluralism is in vogue. So pluralism, as in a lot of people who maybe would say they were Christian, but was still married to a lot of kind of culture and tradition. And so that looked like people practicing witchcraft. That looked like what I thought was made up, but human sacrifices still happening. So when we get into some of these villages, and racism, it's alive and well in lots of places. So we were specifically with the Ireo people group. They were treated as second-class citizens. The equivalent of Bolivian Walmart, if you were Ireo, you were not allowed in. So it was a group of people that was completely pushed to the margins of society. People would go missing. There was no way to account for people. But again, back to human sacrifice, like when people went missing, that was the logical conclusion. They were probably sacrificed. So scary, dark, difficult. And I mean, this was a year ago. This isn't something we read about history books that happened way back when. We were still witnessing people going missing to human sacrifice today. So some of the work that one of the missionaries we partnered with did was reaching specifically the Irea people group, this specific tribe. As you can see from some of the pictures, this doesn't look like a nice house. This was the chief's house. This was the nicest house in the village. Lots of flooding, lots of poverty, lots of children, no access to health care. I think in addition to the marginalization of these people group being viewed as these second-class citizens, it was kind of this sad cyclical thing because they had no access to school. So it wasn't as if they had a way to grow up and better themselves. They were still stuck within this kind of repetitive cycle where they would grow up. Typically, the boys would get involved in gangs because there was nothing else to do and no education. And there was a lot of prostitution among the women. So that was more or less the two things you would do based on your gender in that area.
And mainly like sex trafficking of children and their moms.
Yeah.
And the dads were, you can talk about like struggled a lot with addiction because of just the ostracization, being ostracized.
Yeah, lots of abuse in the home. The coca leaf is there. So interesting, if you go to Bolivia, you cannot buy baking soda. You have to show an ID, and you can buy like an ounce of baking soda at a time because you would take the coca leaf, you put some fiberglass in your mouth, put the baking soda in there, you chew it up, and you get free-form cocaine. And that's just normal. People would just walk around with this giant bulge in their mouth, and like that was normal. That's what you did. That kind of transcended all classes, but that was especially prevalent within this people group. Just pick off a coca leaf, chew it up, and there you go. So lots of issues with addiction, in part because of just how easy it was to get a hold of that. Drinking, rubbing alcohol, because there's nothing else to get. That's not a good idea. That led to a lot of death as well. So a lot of issues there. All sorts of kind of issues and health disparities in that way. Coincidentally, that led to a lot of abuse in the home. And so that also, unfortunately, fed into some of the issues with sex trafficking. So women, especially younger girls, tended to be abused. The government tended to not get involved. And if they did get involved, usually that was to send them to a foster home. And we got to visit and spend some time at a foster home as well, and those places were just as bad. So pretty dark, spiritually oppressive, sad place with very little opportunity. So we got to kind of work with one of the missionaries there who had started and she was a social worker by trade, so had started kind of this little home foundation within this kind of destitute area. And really the goal was just to kind of keep the family unit together, counseling through abuse, counseling through sexual abuse, spreading the gospel, in a way like that. As far as the medical piece goes, we weren't as involved as heavily. It was a lot more like Megan had talked about what we're doing back in Jordan, in rural Jordan. We're doing the same thing here. I'm talking about not doing cocaine, talking about washing your hands, talking about things like that. So the medical was less hands-on and more kind of tangential, periphery, things of that nature.
Yeah, and so the missionary worked with, so she has worked with the kids in this neighborhood, so she has after-school programs to teach them, to kind of give them some sort of education. She also has her husband has programs with the fathers to kind of equip them with skills to kind of be able to kind of step out of some of those habits that they had created, and then also work with the women to be like, hey, what is it like to be a mom, and what are ways that we can empower you to even get documentation and get a driver's license and things like that that seem so easy to come by here, but just are very different in that setting. And we got to, just do basic first aid a lot, and it was more just like education and teaching some of the staff there, like CPR and things like that. And so that was a way that we could help them. And then just encouraging stories of one of the first kids that she had worked. She's been there about 10 years, and so she's worked with the children a lot. And for the first time, someone graduated high school and is going to college, and so that was really exciting. And so just to see that the Lord continued to persevere her and then work through that ministry, so that was really encouraging. So to wrap things up, I think we focused on medicine today, but just really kind of considering, especially in undergrad, like what gifts do you have? What has God kind of given you in terms of passions and talents, and how can you use that to expand his kingdom? What languages do you speak? Because it was very good and helpful that I spoke Spanish, and like Sandon picked up on a lot, and it was just like, okay, but we didn't know Arabic, and that was really hard. And like there are translators, and I am so grateful, praise God for them. But just thinking about those things and ways that you can really use those. So outside of medicine, just a few examples. In Bolivia, there was a organization that had rescued women from sex trafficking and employed them in the textile industry, and they were seamstresses, and they got to make leather handbags and backpacks and wallets, and they talked about the gospel, and these women just had totally new lives of purpose, of a skill, of just knowing their freedom in Christ. And that was really a sweet way to just be like, hey, yeah, you like, if you can sew, that's great, you know. And then another way that someone else used a skill was a midwife that we worked with in Bolivia who helped deliver babies. Her husband had his agricultural and ecology degree, and he knew how to use the land to best kind of promote crop growth. And so he worked with the local Bolivians to kind of educate them on like, hey, this will not grow because the soil is bad in this way, and try this. And so he had like all these gardens, and he had just had a gift to kind of share with them. And so that was really sweet to see like neighbors who had also had similar crops and knew kind of how to use and be self-sufficient in that way to have resources. So those are just some examples outside of medicine that the Lord can use.